There is a feeling we carry but rarely name. It does not scream, it does not rage. It hides, quiet, heavy. Shame is not pain on the surface, it is silence beneath the skin. And yet it shapes how we love, how we hide, how we live. Have you ever felt unworthy even when no one blamed you? Have you ever feared being seen, not because you did something wrong, but because of who you believe you are? That is not guilt, that is shame. And shame runs deeper than we realize. Shame does not say, I made a mistake. It says, I am the mistake. It wraps itself around your identity, not your actions. Your existence. It does not ask for forgiveness. It demands disappearance. It wants you to vanish into performance. Carl Jung saw shame not as weakness, but as a spiritual wound. A fracture between who you are and who you think you must be. And in that gap, the soul begins to go silent. Because it cannot speak through masks. It waits behind what you hide. This video is not about blame. It is about return. Return to the part of you buried beneath shame. The child who stopped singing. The heart that stopped reaching. The truth that went quiet. What you hide will shape you, until you choose to look. Carl Jung spent his life studying what others avoided. He looked not just into the conscious mind, but into the places most people were taught to ignore. He called it the shadow. And within the shadow, he saw shame as one of its deepest roots. The shadow is not evil. It is everything you cannot accept about yourself, your anger, your fear, your desire. But more than anything, your shame, not the kind you confess, the kind you deny, the kind you build a life to hide from. Jung believed shame was a psychic divider. It splits the self, the part you present, and the part you repress. And in that split, the soul begins to fade, not because it is gone, but because it no longer has a voice through which it can speak. He did not pathologize shame, he respected it. He knew it came from early wounds, from being judged when you were vulnerable, from being told who you are is too much, or not enough. And so you buried the truth to belong. But Jung also believed that what we bury does not die, it dreams, it waits. It shows up in our patterns, in our relationships. In the quiet grief we cannot explain. The work, he said, is not to destroy the shadow. It is to make it conscious. And through that, to become whole again. Guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am something wrong. This is the difference Carl Jung cared about deeply. Because guilt can lead to repair, but shame leads to hiding. And what hides in silence begins to shape us unconsciously. Guilt is about behavior. It can be specific. You can name it, apologize, learn. But shame is about identity. It attaches to the core of who you are. It does not ask for correction. It demands erasure. That is why shame wounds so deeply. Jung understood that guilt can be resolved through action. But shame requires inner reconciliation. It is not just about what happened. It is about what you began to believe about yourself in the moment it happened. That belief becomes the cage. You can forgive guilt, but shame lingers when left unnamed. It builds layers. It creates a false self. The person you perform so no one sees what you feel underneath. And yet, it is this hidden part that the soul wants to reclaim. Understanding the difference is not just psychological. It is spiritual, because guilt says you are still connected. Shame says you are alone. And Jung believed that healing begins the moment we stop believing we are too broken to belong. Shame rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with a name. It hides beneath habits. It wears the costume of perfectionism, of people-pleasing, of silence. Jung understood that the psyche cannot hold what it cannot face. So it buries shame deep. You may think you are simply avoiding conflict, or being humble, or working hard. But often, you are protecting something more fragile. A belief formed long ago that your feelings are too much, that your truth will cost you love. This is how shame survives. It avoids the light of awareness. It lives in reflexes. in the flinch before you speak, in the impulse to downplay your needs, in the sudden urge to apologize just for existing. And over time, it becomes identity. Carl Jung saw the unconscious not as a place of evil, but of exile. A place filled with parts of the self pushed away to survive. And shame is the gatekeeper of that exile. It tells you not to go there, that to look is to fall apart. That silence is safety, but what you avoid owns you. Until you name it, it will speak through your choices, through your tone, through your fear of being truly seen. It is not louder than you, but it is deeper. And it waits for your presence like a child waits for permission to speak. Shame shows up in dreams as hiding, running, or being exposed. It appears in waking life as defensiveness or withdrawal. The unconscious does not forget. It repeats the message of shame until something within you turns around and finally listens. Identity is not only shaped by what we are proud of, it is shaped just as powerfully by what we are ashamed of, especially when that shame goes unspoken. Jung saw identity as a mask the ego builds to protect what the soul once felt was unacceptable. When shame enters early, it rewires the way we relate to ourselves. Instead of asking, "Who am I really?" we begin to ask, "Who do I need to be to avoid rejection?" Slowly, the true self retreats, and a version of you forms to please, perform, and survive. You begin to mistake approval for belonging. You value control over connection. The voice inside whispers, "If they really knew me, they would leave." So you curate a self. One that hides its longings, tones down its passion, and edits its truth. Jung taught that the cost of shame is authenticity. And when authenticity is lost, vitality fades. The person who shows up to life may look successful, but feels hollow. Because identity has become a performance, not a reflection of the inner world. The tragedy of shame is that it convinces us to protect others from who we really are. But the soul cannot thrive behind a mask. It begins to ache, not for attention, but for reunion. With what was hidden, with what was real, with what still longs to be seen. The true self is not something you build. It is something you remember, something you once were before shame arrived. Jung believed that shame is not just a feeling. It is a turning point. A moment when the soul learns it is not safe to be fully seen. That moment may come quietly, a glance of disapproval, a punishment for being too expressive, a silence after telling the truth. The message is clear. What is most real in you is too much, too strange, too unacceptable. And so you begin to hide. But you do not just hide what hurt. You hide the part of you that felt it. You disconnect from the self that once danced, questioned, wept freely. You become who you think you must be to be accepted. And that's when the abandonment begins. Jung called this the beginning of fragmentation. The soul splits. Not violently, but subtly. The outer self continues, but the inner self fades. Not gone, just buried. And from that moment on, you live with a quiet ache. The sense that something essential is missing. This ache is not weakness. It is memory. It is the soul remembering who you were before you learned to be ashamed. And the deeper that shame goes, the more distant your true self feels. Until one day, you realize the thing you miss most is not a person. It is yourself. When the true self is no longer safe, the psyche adapts. It does not stop expressing, it starts performing. Jung saw this as the birth of the false self. Not a lie, but a mask. Not meant to deceive, but to protect what once felt too exposed to exist. This false self is often praised. It learns to be responsible, likable, successful. It avoids conflict. It anticipates needs. It blends in where the soul once stood out. But the cost of this survival is depth, aliveness, and the quiet intimacy of being fully known. You smile when you want to cry. You say yes when your body says no. You appear confident while feeling hollow. Over time, even you begin to forget the difference. You identify with the mask and forget who lived behind it. Carl Jung did not judge this adaptation, he honored it. Because it kept you safe, it helped you belong. But he also warned that the false self can only take you so far. Eventually, the soul will hunger, not for achievement, for authenticity. The tragedy is not that you became someone else. The tragedy is that you thought you had to, that your realness was too risky, that your truth was too much. But Jung believed that healing begins when the soul is no longer willing to be hidden. The false self is a shell. It may impress others, but it cannot fulfill you. The deeper self waits beneath it. Not to be fixed, but to be found. Not to be judged, but to be welcomed back. Because who you really are was never broken, only buried. The soul does not shout, it whispers. It speaks in dreams, in longings, in quiet grief. But when shame grows too loud, the soul retreats. Not because it is gone, because it can no longer speak through a self that will not listen. Jung knew that the soul is not lost. It is silenced. Not by malice, but by fear. Fear that if you showed your true face, you would lose love. So you wear the one that fits, the one that pleases. And in doing so, you begin to lose touch with what is most real. The silence does not feel empty at first. It feels productive, controlled, even praised. But over time, a hollowness grows. A sense that something is missing, even when everything looks fine. That missing piece is not a failure. It is the mute cry of the soul. When you abandon your truth, the soul waits. It waits in the tension you feel before you speak, in the ache you carry without words, in the fatigue of living someone else's version of who you are. It does not punish you. It simply grows quiet. And yet even in silence, it never gives up. It sends signals. A dream that shakes you. A sadness that returns without cause. A moment of beauty that brings you to tears. Jung believed these were not random. They were invitations from the soul, asking you to come back. Carl Jung believed that the very thing we avoid holds the key to our transformation. He wrote, "The gold is in the dark." Meaning, what you most fear to feel is often where your deepest wholeness waits. And nothing hides deeper than shame. Shame tells you to turn away. Jung asks you to turn toward. Not to dwell in pain, but to meet what you once abandoned. He understood that healing is not found in escaping the shadow. It is found in walking into it with open eyes. You will not find your depth by polishing your image. You will find it by facing the moment you stopped trusting yourself. The moment you decided your truth was too much. That moment is not the end, it is the door. There's gold inside your shame. Not because the shame is good, but because it guards what is precious, your voice, your tenderness, your forgotten freedom. These are not destroyed by shame, they are hidden by it. And they wait for your return. Jung's alchemy was not about avoiding darkness. It was about transforming through it. When you face shame without collapsing, something sacred happens. Not drama, not glory, but quiet reunion. A piece of you comes back. And with it, your soul begins to speak again. Jung did not just theorize the soul. He gave us a way to speak with it. One of his most powerful tools was active imagination. A process of entering dialogue with the hidden parts of the self, especially the ones burdened by shame. You close your eyes, you breathe, and you listen. Not to logic, but to the figure inside you that still holds the wound. It may come as a child, a shadow, a voice, something raw and forgotten. You do not analyze it, you allow it to speak. This practice is not about fantasy, it is about inner reality. The psyche speaks in images, in feelings, in symbols. When you meet the shamed part in imagination, you give it what it was once denied. Presence, permission, a place in your awareness. Jung believed this was not pretend, it was sacred. You are not fixing the wound, you are building a bridge to it. And through that bridge, the energy trapped in shame begins to move. The soul begins to thaw. What was frozen begins to breathe again. You may cry, you may tremble, you may resist, but something in you will feel true, because this is not about healing others. It is about hearing the part of yourself you thought had to stay hidden forever, and realizing it never stopped waiting for you. Shame does not disappear when you ignore it. It transforms when you bring it into the light of awareness. Jung did not believe in erasing the past. He believed in integrating it, giving it meaning, letting it shape you without controlling you. Integration is not denial, it is recognition. It is sitting beside the part of you that once shrank in silence and saying, "You belong." It is allowing that voice to be heard without flinching, without fixing, just being with what is real. When shame is integrated, it becomes compassion. You begin to see others differently. You stop needing to judge, because you know what it feels like to carry pain in silence. The more you understand your own shadow, the less you punish the shadows of others. Shame also becomes power, not in dominance, but in depth. You no longer fear your vulnerability. You know its shape, its sound, and in knowing it, you become stronger. Because nothing hidden owns you anymore. You can speak what was once unspeakable. Jung knew that wholeness was not about being unscarred. It was about being real, and realness is forged through honesty, through returning to the places within you that hurt the most, and staying there long enough for healing to take root. Carl Jung did not believe in perfection. He believed in wholeness, and wholeness is not found by becoming flawless. It is found by including the parts of you that you were taught to hide, especially the ones shaped by shame. You do not become whole by cutting out the brokenness. You become whole by bringing it in, by seeing it not as a flaw, but as a doorway, a place where you once left yourself behind, a place that still waits for your return. The parts you want to hide carry your sensitivity, your need, your truth. They are not enemies, they are messengers. They remind you where you learned to disconnect, and they guide you back to a version of yourself that still believes in honesty. Jung taught that what we exclude from the self becomes the shadow, and the more we push it away, the more power it gains. But when we welcome it, it begins to soften. It stops screaming, because it no longer has to fight to be seen. Wholeness is not ease, it is courage. The courage to sit with what you once fled, to hold what you once condemned, to bring compassion where you once brought judgment, and through that presence, to become someone who no longer hides from life. Shame feels like a wound, but beneath the wound is something tender, something human. Jung believed that shame, when approached with awareness, leads us not to weakness but to truth. It is where we meet the parts of ourselves that still need care. The places you feel most ashamed are often the places where you were most innocent, most vulnerable, most yourself. And because that self was once judged or abandoned, you learn to believe that being human was unsafe. But humanity is not a flaw, it is the doorway to connection, to love, to creativity. The cracks in you are not signs of failure. They are signs that you lived, that you felt deeply, that you dared to be open in a world that sometimes asks us to shut down. When you turn toward shame instead of away, you begin to recover something essential. Not just confidence, but tenderness. You begin to understand that others hurt too, that we all hide, that we all long to be loved where we feel unlovable. This recognition softens your gaze. It makes you more honest, more forgiving, more alive, because you no longer live to perform strength. You live to embody truth, and that truth includes your wounds, your softness, your full, complex self. There is a moment in every healing journey when silence is no longer sustainable, when the pain of hiding outweighs the fear of being seen. Jung called this the turning point. Not when you are healed, but when you are ready to stop pretending. You do not need to reveal everything to everyone, but you must reveal the truth to yourself. You must be willing to look at what you buried, not to relive the pain, but to reclaim the part of you that was buried with it. This takes courage, not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that shows up in a journal entry, in a shaky conversation, in the moment you choose not to dismiss your own need. Courage is not about being unafraid. It is about showing up anyway. Jung knew that what we conceal begins to control us. But what we name, we begin to free. And each time you reveal something you once thought you had to hide, the soul takes a breath. It returns. It expands. It remembers its own worth. To live without shame is not to live without scars. It is to live without apology for being human, for feeling deeply, for needing love, for making mistakes and learning through them. This is not weakness. This is awakening. Carl Jung never asked us to cleanse ourselves of darkness. He did not preach purity. He invited us to wholeness. And wholeness means embracing the full range of what it means to be human. Not just what is light, but what is hidden, what hurts, what heals. To be whole is not to be perfect. It is to include, to welcome every part of the self that once felt unworthy, to stop measuring your worth by how little you feel and how much you please, and to start remembering that your truth was never a threat. Jung saw the soul not as something to purify, but as something to reunite with, piece by piece, memory by memory, by turning toward the places we once turned away from, not to be punished, but to be made real. He knew that the goal of life was not to ascend beyond our flaws, but to descend into them with compassion, to hold space for our contradictions, to see the sacred in the shadow, to love not only who we strive to be, but also who we forgot we were. This is the essence of Jung's vision, that healing is not a process of becoming better. It is a process of becoming whole, of reclaiming what shame taught us to disown, and finding, in that very disowned part, the voice of the soul we had been searching for all along. What you hide does not disappear. It becomes your posture, your silence, your hesitation before love. Jung warned that the unconscious will guide your life, and you will call it fate, especially when shame goes unnamed. You may think you have left it behind. That time has buried the pain, but the psyche is not linear. It remembers through repetition, through relationships that echo old wounds, through emotions that seem too big for the moment. That is not coincidence. That is memory. The parts of you left in the dark continue to shape your choices, not because you are broken, but because you are unfinished. And the only way to complete the story is to go back, to look again, to turn toward what still waits for your attention. Jung believed that what we repress returns, but not to haunt us, to heal us. Each trigger is a messenger. Each ache is a signal. Each breakdown is an invitation to stop running and begin listening. What you hide holds the lesson your soul came here to learn. You do not need to fear the shadow. You need to meet it. Sit beside it. Hear what it has to say. Not to justify the shame, but to liberate the life trapped beneath it. Because what shapes you most is not what happened. It is whether you choose to turn toward it with love. If healing begins with awareness, then it deepens with honesty. Not just with what you feel, but with what you still cannot accept. Carl Jung did not ask us to be fearless. He asked us to be truthful, especially when truth feels uncomfortable. So pause and ask yourself, gently and without judgment, what part of me am I still ashamed to love? What memory do I avoid? What feeling do I hide? What truth do I edit in order to seem acceptable? These questions open the door. You may not have the answer right away, but even the willingness to ask begins a shift. It creates space. Space for something buried to breathe again. For the soul to speak where silence once lived. For love to reach the place shame had claimed. That part of you, the one still waiting in the dark, does not need to be fixed. It needs to be welcomed, not because it is perfect, but because it is real, because it holds your story, because without it, your wholeness is incomplete. Jung taught that the soul returns not when we arrive at light, but when we embrace the dark with open arms. So ask not how to be better. Ask how to be more whole. Ask what you are still ashamed to love. And then, begin the quiet act of loving it anyway.